The anime industry has always been a difficult world to be a part of, but not everyone realizes just how difficult it can really be. Today we'll be looking at an anime studio that in recent times has seen some of the most difficult parts of the industry, from scheduling to just overall fan backlash, and we're going to be looking into how that actually occurs. Cloverworks is an anime studio that technically has only somewhat recently come into existence, but has consistently made a splash in the community one way or another despite that. Officially formed in October of 2018, the studio is actually a part of A1 Pictures, who you probably know for anime such as Sword Art Online, Love is War, and 86. It was initially just a studio rebrand, but at some point Cloverworks eventually made the decision to declare its independence. Unfortunately for Cloverworks, freedom is never that simple, and they are still a subsidiary of the production company Aniplex, which is notorious for its poor scheduling and overworking studios under its belt, which we'll get to later. Once the departure had been made, 4 anime had their credits transferred over to Cloverworks instead of A1, those anime being Slow Start, Darling in the Franxx, Persona 5, and Ace Attorney Season 2. The studio actually started off doing pretty well for itself. While Darling in the Franxx may not have gone over as well as they would have liked, it's not like everything was on them, as it was a co-production with Trigger, so they could now start to look forward to their own projects. The anime they first kicked things off with was actually Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, which was pretty much an immediate hit with audiences, garnering a sequel film not long after the first season. They followed up Bunny Girl Senpai with another immediate hit with the first season of The Promised Neverland. Among their works was the final installment of the Fairy Tail anime, worked on in collaboration with A1 and Bridge, as well as an installment of the Fate Grand Order series. Things were looking up for the young studio, but the anime industry is a harsh reality, and that was about to become very clear to them. Cloverworks had a couple of fruitful years under their belt, but with success came expectations, and it would eventually prove to become a bit too much for the growing studio at the time. The year was 2021, and Cloverworks had the winter season lined up with the very strong group of anime, at least on the surface. Remember how I mentioned Aniplex was notorious for scheduling issues? Well, who could have guessed? Those eventually came into play once they seemed to trust Cloverworks enough with a bigger workload. As strong as the titles for the winter season were for the studio, they were also releasing 3 anime in one season, which for any studio is pretty rough, especially one like Cloverworks with only a couple years of independence from A1. To further understand the issue here, I want to look at some comments that are actually from the winter season of 2023, where many anime with Aniplex as its producer were being delayed. It's a couple years out from this current timeline, but it'll make sense in a second. I tend not to touch Reddit with a 20-foot pole unless I need something very specific, but Cosmic Penguin here summed up what I was looking for pretty well, so I'm going to go over some of this post. If you want to see the original, I'll link it down below in the description. The first comment here is from Kantakame, who is the director of the Saikano series, which was animated first by A1 and then eventually finished up by Cloverworks, but both of course came under Aniplex. Some time ago, I talked with an Aniplex producer. Maybe you should all stop putting up new anime in the January and winter season. All those staff are going to be burnt out over the New Year holidays, and they would not be able to enjoy the time off. And if you are giving outsourcing work to China, it's Lunar New Year in February, and people there aren't working around then either. My comments were rejected. Pretty self-explanatory there. Obviously, there's a stretch of holidays in the wintertime for pretty much every culture, but the anime industry actually relies pretty heavily sometimes on outsourcing to Chinese animation studios to help get work done. And during this time frame of release, Lunar New Year is in full swing, which obviously is a huge event for China. Anime is done on a tight schedule because we can't have nice things, so obviously studios need to pull some strings to get work done. Kame made another comment in regards to Chinese outsourcing as well. While desperately trying to outsource during the holiday period, the producers were actually offering up to 5 times the normal payment to try and get some cuts done. Even then, they couldn't find anyone to take it. This puts a large strain on the animation studio and very well can lead to delays or just poor production quality with an anime overall. Next up, we actually have quite a few comments from Tomohiko Ito, the director of the Sword Art Online up until Ordinal Scale movie, along with other well-known anime such as Erased. The first comment reads that due to the delay of the first Sword Art Online progressive movie, the then CEO of A1 Pictures, Shinichiro Kashiwada, actually stepped down from the position. I couldn't find anything that actually listed him as the CEO of A1 at any point, but I believe this may just be a small translation goof, as the source of this information is obviously quite connected to the scene and has no reason to lie about this, so it may just be poor researching on my part. Afterwards, it was then also revealed by Ito that Licorice Recoil, the the A1 original anime from summer of 2022 that ended up being a major success was actually meant to release in the fall of 2021, yet was delayed 3 seasons somewhere along the production line. This type of delay is nothing new for Aniplex, as they actually wanted the anime for 86 to release in 2020, but because of, you guessed it, production issues and because of the onset of the pandemic, it was pushed until 2021, which even then it had to be a split core production, along with the fact that the anime received a multitude of delays during its run. So many delays, in fact, that the second part of 86 had its final 2 episodes pushed into 2022 because they delayed so many times while airing that they ran out of slots in their network to fit their show in before the winter 2022 season began. Ito went on to mention that Aniplex tends to want to produce too many different titles, and because they have a high quality standard, if an anime studio doesn't think they can meet the schedule demands, they just dump that title off to A1 as they are a large and storied studio. Finally, he had this remark to make. It's easy to understand why titles like Demon Slayer, with enough money, enough time, and an abundance of first-rate staff at hand, could end up being such a great finished product. However, if you only rely on the production side's over-diligence to produce something like Kimetsu no Yaiba, this is unreasonable, because you simply don't have the basis and staff to do so. Basically, what he's saying here is that Aniplex has gained an unrealistic view of anime development from working with these top-tier studios. A1 and Ufotable are extremely talented studios that have been around for a while, so to put those same standards onto other studios that may be smaller or newer, it's simply unrealistic. Aniplex continues to push this agenda despite all of the warning signs not to do so. Along with an over-idealistic approach to production, they continue to push anime out early in the year and just watch as problems arise. As stated, winter 2023's issues were the reason that these comments came to light. Many anime were delayed for various amounts of time, and the vast majority were Aniplex productions. Nier Automata was delayed indefinitely, Ayakashi Triangle, Misfit of Demon King Academy Season 2, and Fate Strange Fake were pushed back to summer of 2023, and finally Unite Up was delayed for 2 weeks. Aniplex claimed that COVID was to blame, and that's not entirely wrong. COVID did have a resurgence in Japan during that time, and they couldn't outsource to China because not only were they on the holiday season, of course, but they also had a COVID resurgence of their own. It's not wrong to say that COVID was a factor, but it's not telling the complete story of Aniplex. Now that we have that out of the way, we can talk about the infamous year of 2021 that put Cloverworks into a bit of a bind. It all started with everyone's favorite sequel adaptation in January. Remember how much everyone loved the first season of The Promised Neverland? Well, yeah. I'm going to be completely honest here. I have no idea what the fuck happened. There were certainly production issues behind the scene because, Aniplex, but that doesn't explain the rest of what happened with the anime. People noticed pretty early on that things were not going quite like the manga, even though personally I completed the manga myself and I didn't see anything too crazily changed at first. But of course that flipped quickly as we got to the 4th episode where the anime just completely threw away any chance of staying in line with the source material. The manga's most infamous arc, Goldie Pond, was cut in order to just get to the end of the series. One could argue that the manga being completed meant that there was no reason to continue with the anime in a long-term sense, but the series was still extremely popular despite having ended, and the anime would likely do more than fine on its own. It's a baffling decision, and unless I missed something during research, we still don't know why it was done like that and who decided it. The production got so bad that at the end of episode 10, no one was given credit for writing the episode script, meaning it was likely that no one wanted the credit for it at that time. The Blu-ray sales were another indicator of production gone wrong, as the anime only managed to sell 317 copies in its first week of release, less than half of what Season 1 did. Season 1 didn't do completely amazing Blu-ray wise either, but Season 2 just completely flopped. It was a rough situation for everyone involved, but things don't get much better from there. The next anime released for them in winter was Horimiya, which I don't have too much to comment on as it seemed the production was fine for them, but I did think it was worth mentioning that the adaptation for Horimiya also speed ran to the end of the manga, which is probably more fair as the source material likely overstayed its welcome after a while, and since it was recently ended, the anime was probably made with the sole intention of advertising it one last time. Last in line for their winter lineup was the anime original Wonder Egg Priority. Obviously, as an anime original, there was no source material to mess up this time, but as they had to create something from scratch, that left plenty of room for problems. For a while, everything seemed to be fine. Wonder Egg presented itself as a well-made anime that focused on the general difficulties that girls can face while growing up in terms of mental health. It had a large amount of initial praise from audiences and was a hot topic of discussion. This may have been a curse for the show, as there were many eyes on it and it was not ready for that kind of attention. While generally the anime itself stays captivating throughout, it became noticeable that there was trouble brewing in paradise. This first indicator manifested with a delay to the anime around halfway into the airing cycle. Of course, the problems were there from the start. Multiple times through the anime's airing cycle, episodes were completed just hours before. A good thread on this and another production goose comes from the Cave-In on Twitter. They're a good follow if you're interested in some of the dives into the animation industry, and the link to the original post is in the description, but it states as follows. By the time any delays happened, the Strain team had finished multiple episodes hours before the broadcast, relying on people like Cloverworks transcending human limits and tapping into literal fan communities overseas to share the burden. The finale barely made it after 3 months. Cloverworks, man, I'm butchering that name for sure. For those who don't know, is actually a pretty accomplished animator and has worked on not only a number of Cloverworks anime, but also some pretty high-profile anime in general, like Mob Psycho 100, Made in Abyss, and recently Suzume and Oshinoko. So yeah, he's pretty damn good, to put it lightly. Also, that bit about getting fan communities involved in the production of Wonder Egg Priority isn't a joke. Referencing another piece, this time from Anime News Network, Kim Morrissey put together an interesting article interviewing 2 people who helped to bridge the language gap between fan animators and the web production team. And from that interview, they linked another one to a Croatian animator who goes by Annie. So thanks for the redirect. I swear I have like 10 tabs open at all time working on this script. Those links will also be in the description. When asked how the situation came about, Annie replied as such: I was actually contacted by the production assistant Hayato Sato, who I also want to thank for giving me a chance, knowing it was my very first time working in the industry, through Twitter, and was asked if I would like to participate in the episode. That is certainly one way to be contacted for such an important job, especially with no experience at all, but that's not the only thing I wanted to take away from this interview, as Annie was also asked about the time constraints of the job. The schedule was tight indeed, but the passion and the love for the series pushed me on. I think the biggest thing that made me able to finish it was knowing that I am working on the same project on which many legends participated too. That's such an important statement because in reality, that's why these animators can deal with all of these issues, because they are dedicated to their craft. Wonder Egg Priority had a high level of quality, and all of that came from the blood, sweat, and tears of the people who care so much. Their willingness to push on doesn't excuse the work conditions though. Animation producer Shota Umehara was sent to the hospital not once, but twice during the production of Wonder Egg Priority. The final special episode posted a whopping 5.12 score on Mel, which typically I wouldn't use to make a point, but anything under 6 on that website is generally a pretty good sign that something has gone terribly wrong. Of the promised 46-minute runtime, half of that was a recap, and the other half was a sorry attempt to end a convoluted story that was far too ambitious for the inexperienced team. You know, after that whole Wonder Egg section, this one here is going to feel like a giant nothing burger in comparison, but I need to bring it up regardless. The final anime Cloverworks released in 2021 wasn't actually a winter anime, but because we can have no nice things, it was immediately afterward in the spring, so they did not get any rest at all. The production issue here was less time, and once again goes back to the composition of the series. Early on in the season for Shadow's House, an important character who was meant to be introduced did not show up. If you're an anime only watching like I was, it meant nothing and we could still enjoy the show for what it was, but the source material enjoyers were obviously concerned about the future of the franchise's anime, but we will save the aftermath of that for a discussion later. The real final stop on the train of sorrow actually spills over into, you guessed it, Winter 2022. Tokyo 24th Ward was an original anime from Cloverworks, and the schedule was, who could have guessed, once again less than ideal. In a CBR article by Michael Lacerna, it's documented that an animation director of Cloverworks team for 24th Ward, Kiminori Ito, tweeted out his disdain for the schedule at hand quite bluntly. I'm aboard a sinking ship. We're about to go under. Ha ha ha. The animation director later added, I've been involved in a lot of jobs with low quality drawings, but it looks like I'm about to experience an animation breakdown this time. I'm only half joking. He also added, and this is my favorite quote, the schedule is shit, which brings to mind the dark history of Cloverworks. Things do not get much worse than your animation director openly saying how ass your schedule is. This wouldn't be the end of the issues for the anime either, as episode 7 was delayed over quality concerns as they wanted to stay consistent throughout. It was certainly concerning that Winter 2022 had another another 2 anime from Cloverworks to go alongside 24th Ward, no rest at all, but their fates would turn out much different than everything else mentioned here, and Cloverworks would go on to have a pretty great year overall. Things were looking pretty dicey for Cloverworks for a while, and I'm sure a lot of people had lost a fair amount of faith in the studio. Regardless of how much of a role Aniplex probably played with the issues their anime had, the public opinion generally tends to immediately go after the animation studio, since it's much easier to understand the role they play in the creation of a show versus the producer role. Despite all the issues they had in the prior year, and even with 24th Ward at the start of this one, they weren't going to give up. Cloverworks still had another 6 anime to bank on for the year, and there wasn't really anything bad to say about any of them. Like I said earlier, there were another 2 anime to hit in the winter season for Cloverworks, and those were Akabi's Sailor Uniform and My Dress Up Darling. Starting with Akabi, as some people may not have heard about it, the anime released on the same day actually as Dress Up Darling, and did make at least a little bit of a splash with its art direction. I didn't know anything about the series beforehand, but I had heard from a friend that the manga for Akabi was mainly known for its art, and that Cloverworks would need to go a step beyond in order to make that translate to the screen. Plenty of times people will compare the manga panels with an anime still frame and feel like there wasn't enough soul put into something, but usually it's hard to expect an anime to shape up to a detailed manga's art. This wasn't the case with Akabi, as Cloverworks seemed to nail down the aesthetic and chose to hyper-focus on certain moments in order to make the most impact. Even with the great-looking art, the production never seemed to falter and the animation stayed consistent even with its high quality. And while I do think the art direction did more for the anime than its general animation did, it was nominated for Best Animation at the 2023 Crunchyroll Awards, making its mark on even the Western community. If Akabi made a splash, My Dress Up Darling did a cannonball straight into the water. You couldn't go 5 minutes without seeing people raving about this anime, and for generally good reasons. Of course, part of it was Marin gaining her very own cult, but it was also the high quality given to the art. Much like Akabi, the animation quality was consistent throughout, and it really brought the characters to life. People couldn't stop obsessing over Marin for both personality and, other reasons. The interesting premise of focusing on cosplay while watching the lively characters interact really brought people in and kept them there. The anime proved this by selling over 10,000 copies of its Blu-ray in the first week. Later on, a season 2 was confirmed for production, and the animation producer for the show tweeted out that there was actually no plans to make a season 2 in the first place, but the overwhelming support brought by fans is what led to it. Cloverworks finally made it through the dreaded winter season with only 1 small hiccup and 2 overall successes. The train wouldn't stop there for them, however, as their next anime was also a major hit. Spy Family started airing in the spring 2022 season with its first core, and the second one would air later in the year during the fall. To say that this anime was a breadwinner would be an understatement, and to make things more interesting, the anime was actually not produced by Aniplex. The animation quality was still up there despite the studio being so busy, and this was likely thanks to the fact that Cloverworks collaborated with Wit Studio on the anime. Splitting up their duties while also breaking the anime into a split core, there was a lot of breathing room for staff on both sides. The studios create high quality work, and together they created a public sensation. The anime was immediately popular in both Japan and the West. It practically became about as mainstream as anime tends to get, and once part 2 finished airing, it was announced that there would not only be a season 2, but also an anime original movie. The Blu-ray sold thousands of copies, and while I didn't plan to bring up the Crunchyroll Awards again, it's worth mentioning that it was nominated for an event-high 19 different categories, among those being the Best New Series Award. I want this list here to be comprehensive, so I'll at least mention In the Heart of Kunoichi Tsubaki, also airing in the spring season, but I didn't watch the anime, so I can't really give too much of an opinion on it, and most other people didn't really seem to watch it either, but hey, I didn't hear anything especially bad about it, and so it seems like it worked out well enough. Anyway, we have a returning guest from earlier in the script, with Shadow's House making its return for season 2. After the small fiasco during season 1 occurred, the authors of Shadow's House actually took to Twitter to explain the change. In order to fit the series into a 13-episode frame, they had to make the change in order to keep things cohesive, but they assured viewers that these changes would be rectified in a potential future season, and well, they were correct. Cloverworks had to take a bit of a detour to get there, but they were successfully able to get the story back on track and deliver a great season and avoid a Promised Neverland situation. This anime isn't small by any means, but I feel like it is a little bit niche in some respects, so honestly, anyone watching right now, I highly suggest watching Shadow's House if you haven't. Obviously, it was good enough to receive a second season, so I think it's worth watching at the very least. Anyway, back to the normal program. Our last stop of the year for 2022 is one that became very close to a lot of people's hearts. Fall 2022 brought us a lot of great anime, and among those was a work of love that truly shows why anime can be so damn good. Bocchi the Rock was an adaptation of a 4-koma manga that was turned into a viral phenomenon during its run. Honestly, I knew I was going to love this anime before it came out, but I didn't expect it to become what it was, nor did anyone else. A lovable cast of a pink blob, Dorito, Mr. Krabs, and the sun itself took over the internet and the anime scene as a whole, passing up even the likes of Chainsaw Man in ratings. For such a simple manga to be turned into what Bocchi was really took people by surprise, and the love was shown each episode. The directing for the series was beyond on point, not to mention the animation, the good music, and the strong voice acting. Wondering just how popular Bocchi the Rock became? The anime so far has sold over 100,000 Blu-rays over the period of time that they have been out, and the final disc still has not been released at the time of writing this. The album of Sokuban songs released after the anime topped the weekly charts in Japan when it first released, and also made it to the top 10 albums worldwide on iTunes. Not to mention the manga now has over 2 million copies in circulation. Even now, the anime is doing live concert events and releasing new singles. It's fair to say that Season 2 is not a matter of if, but when for Bocchi the Rock. At this point in time, Cloverworks are also continuing to add to their revitalized bunch of anime in 2023 and beyond, as 2 new Bunny Girl Senpai movies are being released, and Horimiya's anime is also going to return as Horimiya Peace in order to adapt some of the stories that they cut out when they jumped to the end of the manga. Anime is a cruel industry, and a lot of people know that, but not many people know how rough it can really be, and I hope this video brought that to some people's attention. Whenever you see an anime, just know how hard people work to create it. Obviously, criticism is still valid. There are plenty of poorly done productions out there with no soul put into them at all, and I'm guilty of being upset when a series I like gets a bad adaptation. Anyway, if it wasn't obvious after the Wonder Egg section, these staff members do have a passion for what they're working on. Things aren't always going to work out how we want, and that can lead these people to go far beyond what they should. Case in point, the hospitalization issues. Japan already has a crazy work culture, but animation does not pay the bills very well at this point in time, so really the only reason you would ever want to go into it is because you are passionate. Things are starting to look up, however. Last year around this time, Cloverworks, Wit Studio, Aniplex, and Shueisha all came together to create a new production company under the name of Join. The purpose of this collaboration is to try and bring about an updated business model to the animation industry, and their company page states this: Cloverworks and Wit Studio work together to utilize their strengths to the fullest across the entire production process, from the planning stages to the final product. As we will be involved in every step of the creative process, we will be able to ensure that the final product will be high quality and produced with the values of the target business in mind. In addition to our collaboration with Cloverworks and Wit Studio, we also intend to use the industry connections provided by them to expand our scope and collaborate with various studios, producers, and creators to build a framework that allows us to prioritize those involved in the production process. Rather than moving all processes through a singular company, we will seek to match the best production lines and creators to each project. In addition, we will also provide aid through financial support, create an environment for these projects to flourish, and more. Outside of just that part, the most important thing is stated later on in their page when describing the vision the company wishes to achieve. Now, more than ever before, high-quality animation is vital to the success of creative works. As such, animation studios have begun to play a greater role in the production process, simultaneously shouldering the growing demands and expectations that accompany it. Even if the final product or the company that created said product is successful, it can be difficult to distribute the profits among staff, creators, and those involved in the animation studio. To bring about change in the present situation, we aim to collaborate with these studios to build a new business model, wherein profits are directed back to the creators. Anime is a large market in Japan, and companies that have been stuck doing the same thing for years are starting to realize the power of a quality anime product, but also realize that things cannot continue the way they have been. It remains to be seen how much an effect Join can really have on the anime industry, but with so many high-quality anime coming out that are being produced with both passion and ethics in mind, it's hopeful that perhaps we might be heading towards a brighter future with anime. Things are far from perfect, but Cloverworks' story shows that even though there are problems in the industry, it's possible to bounce back from them and create works of art that impact people all over the world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. This video took a bit of time to write out and produce. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the topic in the comments below, and I hope to see you in another video of mine.